Hi, my name's Livon and I'm a visual artist. Whilst I consider myself a photography collage artist, there's so much more to the finished product than people realise. But I think to know what really makes me create what I do, you have to know a tiny bit about my background. I grew up the 11th of 12 kids and my childhood was quite traumatic in some ways. So I escaped into literature and specifically fairy tales. The magic faraway tree was my favourite escape, and the ability to block out whatever's happening and live in my head was probably what has saved me all my life. As I got older, with the traumas piling up, I still did the same thing, although in a slightly different way, but fantasy and fairy tales were still important. At 51, I started to study photography, and that completely changed my life. I was finally able to create the fairy tales which had always been there for me, comforting me, teaching me, keeping me safe, if only in my mind. I ended up telling my own story as a fairy tale in my first solo exhibition called From Fractured to Fairy Tale in 2019, and that really turned my life around. I felt heard and seen, and that's what we all want. It's a human trait to want our lives witnessed. Fashion also makes us feel seen, and that's why it's such a huge dollar industry. So that's the reason I do a lot of fairy tale inspired work. I believe in once upon a time and happily ever after. Fairy tales are some of the most important stories you will ever read in your life. They teach us lessons and warn us not to trust everyone, especially stepmothers, wolves dressed as humans, little men called Rumpelstiltskin, and a myriad of other untrustables. But mostly they teach us that nothing is impossible and that magic really does exist. And I think we all need to remember that, especially when life knocks us down over and over again. But fashion is an essential part of sharing that magic. Fashion and art are inseparable. Fashion is art, and art is definitely fashion. I mean, look at the Met Gala. That is one big art gallery walking around with champagne in its hand and a strange selection of clothes on its back. Could we imagine TV or film without fashion? I'm showing the Bridgerton here because I'm obsessed with these headpieces. So this is completely personal taste. But going back through the ages, the paintings the world's great masters created were dated by the fashions worn in them. We didn't have photography or computers to document life, but we had art and books. So we know what the fashions were thanks to art. And even if the art wasn't dated, we'd still know a rough time of when it was created thanks to the fashion. It's all intertwined. Some people may not agree, but I believe that all fashion is nothing but a costume. Something we wear to literally cover up the bare essentials of who we are. We dress for occasions, we dress for societal norms, we dress for success, we dress for the job we want. We have set costumes for set events, funerals, weddings, baptisms. Whatever it is, we dress to be seen in a certain way, whether it's a truth or a mask. Whether it's a subconscious decision or intentional, we wear costumes and masks every day, all disguised as fashion. There are so many components that I look at when I'm choosing a costume for a photo shoot. Sometimes the costume dictates the shoot, other times the shoot dictates the costume. I use recycled and reimagined clothes, props and accessories where possible. I hate fast fashion and think that there's always more we can do with discarded junk. Growing up quite poor, I hated second-hand stuff, but over the years, I've not only grown to accept my second-hand rose status, but I've grown to love it. Going into retail shops bores me, but let me loose in an op shop and I could get lost for hours. And the one element I'm always very aware of in my work is colour. And even though I can change it in post-editing, colour can change the feel of the model, and that makes the biggest difference. The colours we wear tell the story as much, if not more, than the fashions we wear. When I find a costume, the colour is paramount to the story I want to tell. I'm a big believer in the psychology of colour. What does white represent in our society? Purity, innocence, cleanliness, new beginnings, peace, neutrality. Lots of things in hospitals, such as those beautiful fashionable gowns, are white to demonstrate a sterile environment. The Pope wears white to symbolise divinity and sacrifice. In art, it also represents a blank canvas, an empty page waiting to be written on, all denoting untapped potential. Historically, it was also associated with a display of wealth, because it required such laborious cleaning, and that's where the term white-collar worker originates from. In some Eastern cultures, though, in direct contrast, white is culturally associated with death, mourning and rebirth. It's often worn at funerals to symbolise the soul's transition to the next life. Black, on the other hand, represents a complexity of meaning. It absorbs all light and carries deep psychological weight in its juxtaposition of meanings. In Western cultures, it represents grief and mourning, death and sorrow. It's a sombre and respectful colour, which provides a barrier to people needing distance. Black is the favourite of businessmen and women, and subcultures like goths, dark wave and punks, who like the rebellion and the edginess of it. Yes, it's also a powerful symbol of elegance, authority and sophistication. It's seen to be popular in high-end or luxurious products, as it doesn't need colour to bring attention to itself. It represents simplicity, such as the little black dress. No frills, no extras, it just speaks for itself. And that, of course, brings us to sex appeal. It reeks of confidence and assurance, which is why it's so fashionable and always will be. So what do other colours represent? Pink is commonly thought of as a girl's colour, hence the bilious pink of Barbie products, but it also represents love, compassion, nurturing and calm. It's a blend of red's passion and white's purity, which is probably why it's so often associated with femininity. It's used in some countries as a deterrent to violence and aggression when walls are painted in it. Blue represents trust, intelligence and stability, often associated with security and professionalism. It's the colour of the ocean and the sky, which suggests serenity and vastness, but it can also represent distance, coldness or sadness, hence having the blues. It is, of course, the colour we associate with boys. Interestingly, it's my least favourite colour and I try to use it as little as possible in photos. But a blue butterfly is often found in my work representing my daughter who passed away. Yellow is all based around the sun. It signifies warmth and optimism and is used often to catch the eye as it's such a vibrant colour. Because of its ability to be easily seen, it's also used as a warning of hazards. Because it's the colour of nature, green universally represents growth, renewal and harmony. If you're given the green light, all is good and you can move on. While it can also denote jealousy, it's generally seen as an earthy and positive colour. Red is the colour of passion, but if that passion is put to the test, it can also represent anger and rage. It's the colour of blood, our life force. Red is next to black on the sexy scale. It's not a shy colour. It says, pay attention, I'm speaking. Now, purple is the colour of kings, queens and spirituality. It's powerful, luxurious and ambitious. It's a blend of the passion and fierce red energy, calmed down by blue stability, bridging both the physical and spiritual world and representing wisdom, creativity and, of course, magic. Brown symbolises stability, reliability and comfort, but it can also be considered a bit dull. It's an earthy colour though, so it is very trustworthy. Then we hit the regal metallics. Silver is heavily associated with the moon, therefore with feminine energy. Like a mirror, it is believed to reflect inner truth and is a protection against negativity. So remember that next time you see a vampire, folks, drag your silver bullets out. It's of course second best to gold in things like sporting competitions and indeed price, so it's come to have a bit of a poor relation type connotation attached to it. And last but certainly not least, we come to gold. It symbolises divine intelligence, spiritual illumination, perfection and high vibrational energy. Associated with the sun and fire, it is the ultimate of all. It is of course heavily connected to wealth, which also means it can be closely connected to greed. Gold in fairy tales can serve as a symbol of magical rewards or divine status, but more often than not, it shows the perils of greed. King Midas's gold brought him no joy. His greed stopped him from eating and embracing those he loved. In Rumpelstiltskin, it showed how greed and boasting can lead to dangerous pacts being made. The goose that laid the golden egg shows the price of trying to pluck a feather from the magic goose. The love of gold above all else leads to curses and corruption in fairy tales and in real life. We only have to look at a certain ballroom to know that. In Japanese culture, kintsugi means the golden joinery. It's the ancient art of repairing broken pottery using lacquer dusted with powdered gold, silver, or platinum. Rather than hiding the cracks, it highlights and celebrates the breaks, treating the repair as part of the object's history and rendering the piece beautiful and unique rather than damaged and worthless. I created a series of images based on this art form, treating the human psyche with the same respect, highlighting our traumas and celebrating the repairs rather than looking at ourselves as damaged individuals. I took the idea from one of my favourite quotes ever, that from J.M. Storm, which says, "She's a beautiful piece of broken pottery put back together by her own hands, and a critical world judges her cracks while missing the beauty of how she made herself whole again." Gold is powerful in fashion, in fairy tales, and in places of power, unfortunately. Symbolism is a huge part of storytelling, and it's a major part of fashion. Shoes are some of the most expensive things we will buy. Shoes, after all, carry us through life, and let's be honest, you don't want an uncomfortable pair of shoes to walk a long distance. But they protect your feet and they make contact with the earth on your behalf. They show your willingness to move forward in life. Shoes play a major role in fairy tales. We all, of course, remember Cinderella. A new pair of shoes changed her whole life. How glass slippers were comfy, I don't know, but I guess that fairy tale was able to do some fantastic magic. Of course, in Charles Perrault's version, the slippers were made of glass, but that could have been a mistranslation from vair, V-A-I-R, which means white squirrel fur, to verre, V-E-R-R-E, which means glass. In the Grimm Brothers version, the slippers are made of gold and silver. Personally, to dance the night away, I'd want Crocs or gel Asics, but whatever the material, Cinderella put on a pair of shoes and went to the ball. When she had to leave urgently, she dropped her shoe, the prince found it and went looking for the person who it fitted, and voila, happily ever after. Imagine if she'd worn those Crocs I spoke about. She would have had the back strap on and they wouldn't have fallen off, but even if they had, he would not have wanted to pick it up. And they are sort of stretchy, so they would have fitted half the girls in town and he might never have found his one true love. Shoes matter. In saying that, most of the models are barefooted in my art. I focus a lot on the soul and the journey, so even the most gorgeous of dresses may not be accompanied by shoes, as they can be a distraction. But in saying that, let's not forget Dorothy, embroiled in a fight with the Wicked Witch of the West for those ruby slippers. They're pivotal to the story, so they have to be included. They are some of the most famous red shoes in history. However, in the original telling of The Wizard of Oz, they were silver slippers. MGM made the slippers red, and the rest, as they say, is history. Whilst The Wizard of Oz is out of copyright and therefore able to be used, the ruby slippers remain the copyright of MGM and cannot be duplicated. Then, of course, there was the lovely Moira Shearer in her cursed red ballet slippers, which came from the Hans Christian Andersen tale, which spoke about vanity. She was cursed to dance endlessly as a punishment for her pride. In the Hans Christian Andersen version, rather than the movie, she begs an executioner to cut off her feet. Fact check, the movie didn't end prettily either, but not quite that drastically. But pretty drastic all in all. Then there are also the worn-out shoes, another Grimm Brothers tale, where a king is baffled by his 12 daughters who return every morning with their dancing shoes worn out, despite their bedroom door being locked. Then we look back to Charles Perrault for the story of the clever cat that asks his poor master for a pair of stylish shoes. Shoes were such a symbol of the upper class that the cat was able to claim a higher social status and disguise himself as a wealthy nobleman's servant to trick the king and an ogre. Good old Puss in Boots. Make no mistake, if you think shoes can change your life, the outer garments we wear can definitely change everything about us. Put on an outfit that makes you feel good and you will carry yourself differently. You'll walk differently. You will possibly even talk differently. It does change the way we perceive ourselves and therefore how other people perceive us. When choosing dresses or clothes for a shoot, I'm always looking for timeless clothes that can be from any era. It's not important to set a proper time unless the story absolutely calls for it, but most fairy tales have been written and rewritten over numerous eras, so timeless is the best era to choose. Medieval, Renaissance, Tudor, Georgian, they can all blend together very well, though I try to avoid anything that looks too one era. So let's go back to Puss in Boots for a bit. That cat succeeded in sucking everyone in because of those shoes. He was able to fool everyone around him. Shoes were a status symbol. What your clothes were made of showed your status in life too. Velvets, satin, brocades, they were all worn by the upper class. Cottons, slubs, wool were the only choice of the lower class. And even though it was hard for them, that's how they dressed themselves. So in telling a visual story, fabric has to be considered alongside colours and accessories. If you want to show someone struggling, you would use a poorer fabric. It is an instant visual note that the person you're seeing doesn't have an easy life. See someone in velvet, you will probably realise they're doing okay. Of course, in today's life, that might not be so obvious with the fashion version of fast food, such as Shein, Temu, etc. But I'm talking about more timeless fairy tale fashions. But really in storytelling, if you dress a bird or a dog or a cat in the right clothes, I'm going to believe they are how you dress them. Now, if I showed you a photo of a girl with a blue dress, white apron, a bow in her hair and black Mary Jane shoes, you would probably assume it was Alice from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. It's so iconic. But if that dress was made from gingham, with bows either side of her hair and ruby slippers on, the girl becomes Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. These two little girls in blue have become so much part of our culture that we only have to see their clothes and we know who they are. They don't have to look the same, they just have to be wearing those clothes. Little Red Riding Hood, who was originally known as Little Red Cap in the Grimm's Brothers story, she's become synonymous with a red cape. If she wore the original red cap with her everyday clothes, would we recognise her instantly? Probably not. But that red cape we'd know anywhere. Again, capes are famous throughout fairy tales, with the invisibility cloak, originally from a story of the same name, but now more famous in Harry Potter. St. Bridget's cloak in Ireland is part of their folklore, with Bridget asking the King of Leinster for a small plot of land to build a monastery. He granted her as much land as her cloak could cover, but luckily she had God on her side and her cloak expanded over many acres. She showed him, never doubt a cape or a cloak, or an Irish girl. We have become so used to characters and their clothing. It doesn't need to always be exact, but for instance, if we see two rotund men with braces, we think of Tweedledee and Tweedledum from Alice in Wonderland. The King, Queen and Knave of Hearts, along with the March Hare, Mad Hatter, Dormouse, they're all easy to pick. The ugly stepsisters from Cinderella wear garish clothes to show their awful personalities, but in the original stories they were usually quite elegant but very mean. Now Snow White is as known for that apple as she is for her dress. Disney's version is probably the best known, but it's far from the Grimm Brothers story, where the Queen, Snow White's real mother, not a stepmother, met a disastrous end after being invited to the wedding and being forced to step into a pair of red-hot iron shoes. There's the shoes again, and dance in them until she drops dead. Ah, the innocence of a fairy tale. Madame de Noir was considered the mother of fairy tales, and she actually coined the literary term fairy tale. She also had the first story to feature Prince Charmant, or Prince Charming as we would know him. She published 25 fairy tales during her lifetime, which is more than Charles Perrault, who gets more recognition than her. Could that perhaps be that not only was she a woman, but a woman with a fierce attitude? A woman who was forced to marry a man as a teen, and then joined her mother in a plot to assassinate her husband, and then had to flee France, returning later in life. A rebel who influenced other writers, especially aristocratic women who called themselves fairies and often rebelled against King Louis XIV. A woman of note. And then, of course, we come to my favourite bit of fashion. It's the crowning glory, headdresses or hats. I love them. Whether it's literally a crown, a headdress, a fascinator, or even a simple sun hat, you can say so much with headwear. When you see a top hat with a 10 and 6 on it, you know it's the Mad Hatter. Other symbols of the Mad Hatter are, of course, teapots and cups and saucers. In fact, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is so full of symbolism it could make you dizzy. But let's just talk headwear for now. A headdress can tell someone's story. It can be indicative of who they are, what they do, what they've done, or any story you want to tell. Each of the headdresses I make are totally full of hidden messages that sometimes only I know. But regardless, with something on the head, you have changed the narrative of the everyday. A headdress can tell the time of day, or the experiences someone's lived through, or the career someone has worked at. Of course, they can be just for fun, looks, or even practicality, but whatever they are, they tell a story. And now let's talk masks. Now, I know a few years ago we were all traumatised by masks, but the one used for protection is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the masks used throughout history as tools for transformation, entertainment, and even spiritual connection. The Venetian masks have probably been some of the most famous. They're playful and mysterious. These masks allow a wearer to simultaneously hide their true identity and reveal a new, often more powerful persona. Like shoes, clothes, and headdresses, masks can be a way to change your identity. In fairy tales, they tend to hold magic as they can completely disguise a person that in reality could not be disguised. Although not actually a mask, Cinderella's outfit was imbued with magic, meaning she was able to disguise her identity. She was then able to mix with people above her standing. In Little Red Riding Hood, as soon as the wolf put on Grandma's cap, he was able to take on her persona, making Little Red Riding Hood trust him. Masks are all about hiding, disguising, and transforming, whether in real life or in a fairy tale. And of course, the rest of shoes, dresses, and headdresses, they all do the same thing. Finally, there are a few other things that are commonly used in fairy tales which our heroes and heroines have often used to disguise themselves. Brass plates, armour, or shields show power and strength. Fairy tale armour often defies physics, granting heroes impossible feats of defence. But who are we to doubt the blacksmithery of elves and goblins? And then there are keys, the ability to open doors and take you through to another realm. But in tales such as Bluebeard, they can have a ghastly consequence if used incorrectly. Scars, makeup, or paint, all are a way to disguise your true self. But in most fairy tales, beauty is applied by curses or spells, rather than our traditional makeup. I mean, look at the Beast from Beauty and the Beast. He would have worn makeup as many men of his era did, but his vanity saw him be cursed by an enchantress and turned into a beast. His heart was the only way he could change back to his usual self. And of course, everybody's favourite, wings. Wings symbolically lift you up, help you to fly, both literally and metaphorically. Now, to be honest, wings weren't part of a fairy's outfit until Victorian times, but boy have they gained popularity in that time. So as you can hopefully see, costume and fashion go hand in hand and have throughout history and fairy tales. So next time you choose a new pair of shoes or a new outfit, imagine the new world you may be creating for yourselves.